Let's talk about how to create dynamic and realistic characters. Now, for my Writing Journey 2.0 project, and in last week's episode, we went through all the different types of conflict that we want to use in our story. And two of the types of conflict, the man versus self and man versus man, is related to your characters in your story. So what we're going to do today is we are going to take some of the conflict ideas that we came up with last week, and we are going to work through the how to create dynamic and realistic characters worksheet that I've listed below for you to create characters for our stories. Now, if you haven't seen it, you can check out last week's episode where we go through the conflict, and I've also listed it down below for you. So, there are different parts that make up dynamic and realistic characters. And I've broken it down into fear, dimension, and agency. Now, you want all three of them present in your characters, and you want to show these throughout your story. Now, just a quick caveat about my own story for my Writing Journey 2.0 project. As it is a epic fantasy, I will have multiple POV or point of view characters. So I will need to go through this worksheet multiple times for each of my characters. And also, because I have multiple characters, I want to make sure that they interact with each other in a dynamic way. So what I did before I started filming this video was I did a free writing exercise on my characters. So basically all I did was I took some time to figure out who I wanted my main characters to be. I brainstormed a couple of things that I could use for the conflict between the characters as well as for each character's internal journey. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of those characters that I determined in that free writing session, and I'm going to go through this template. And once again, this template is down in the description for you to download for free so that you can use it for your own characters as well. So first, let's look at fear. When it comes to your characters, there are things that they want to avoid at all costs. And sometimes your character is aware of these fears, and sometimes they don't even acknowledge it. And the purpose of determining your character's fear is it gives you a place to start to build your story or to build your character's growth and their dimensions with the other characters. So there are two types of fears. There's internal fear and external fear. Now, some fears are universal, like the fear of death, fear of abandonment, things like that. But if you think about the story that you want to tell, then some other more specific fears might come to light. When you're thinking about the fear, you want to create both internal and external fear, because that gives you a place where you can draw from to create conflict within your character, as well as with your character in their relationships with other characters, as well as with other parts of the story, like the plot or the setting. So internal fears, I've got some examples in the template. So some examples of internal fears are intimacy, conflict, loneliness, responsibility, judgment, rejection, failure. External fears are things like fear of heights, fear of confined or open spaces, fear of water, fear of insects, fear of spiders, snakes, etc. These are all things that you can introduce from your plot or from your setting or from other characters that might induce this fear in your character, which will elicit a response and conflict and tension. I'm going to use an example from one of the characters that I will be using in my Writing Journey 2.0 project. Now, these things, they don't have to be very detailed. You can make it as detailed as possible. You don't have to have a million internal fears or external fears. If you can just list one or two, that's also fine. The thing is, you want to use these fears against your character. Now, I know that sounds bad, but we as authors, we need to push our characters to their limits and beyond, because that is how we get a proper character arc and growth and makes it realistic. So we are going to start, and all I'm going to say about this character at this point is that he's a prisoner and he's a vampire. So with that, let's get to it. Okay, so the thing with the external fears that I just want to quickly note here is it's sometimes good to think about those irrational fears that we have, because irrational fears doesn't make sense. There's no reason for us to be afraid of those things, but we all have them. So think about things that almost feels comical and try to infuse that into your external fears for your character. The reason for that is it will make your character more unique, more relatable. And that's at the end of the day what you want. You want your character to be relatable and as realistic as possible. The next thing that you would want to focus on is to make the fear believable. Now, this is where a lot of people can get stuck, or not necessarily stuck, but they can kind of get caught up in how to create this dynamic character. Because to make the fear believable, you need to provide the reader with some kind of reason for the fear. This is basically the fear's origin story. And this will be included in your character's backstory, whether you actually include it on the page or if it's just an inference that your reader will make along the way. This is also what some people call your character's wound or their flaw or their misbelief. This is the thing that ignited that fear within your character. And the reason you need to know this is because it will help your reader understand why your character makes the choices that they make and takes the actions that they take. Because remember, your character throughout the story will do as much as possible to avoid their fear, that internal and external fear that you created. So they will do things that sometimes seems illogical or even irrational because they want to avoid the fear. And if your reader doesn't understand where that fear is based in or where it comes from, then it's not going to be believable action. It's going to feel like your character is just reacting in the way that you need them to react to make the plot work. And you want to avoid that at all costs. So that's why I always say everything needs to be connected, right? Your character's behavior is determined by who they are. And you can create and mold that characteristics so that it fits with the behavior that you would need from the character in order for the plot to make sense. I hope this explanation makes sense to you. Basically, as long as you have a reason for your character's fear, then your reader will be more inclined to believe the events in your story or your character's choices that they make throughout the story. Now, there are a lot of people that say that your character will have multiple flaws. And in this case, I want you to understand that the flaw here is not, I'm not talking about a negative personality trait, because your character will have a few of those. This flaw refers to that fear's origin story, right? So this is the big moment in their past, that first moment when things went haywire for them. And that fear became the truth, their truth, right? The thing with the misbelief is the truth that your character learned because of that wound. So it's not the truth as everyone would see it. It is your character's truth, what they believe to be the truth. The stronger the wound, the more believable the fear. Now, you can do this by introducing multiple moments throughout your character's backstory where this wound reinforced itself and fed into their misbelief. And you can do this over and over again. My suggestion would be to brainstorm the initial wound moment, that first moment when that fear activated in them. And then just make a list of possible moments where it was reinforced. I'm going to go through this now for my own character. So let's get to it. Alright, so now that we have our character's flaw, wound, misbelief, the next thing that we want to do is we want to look at the dimension for the character. So this is where you start to fill in some of the pieces because you want to create a dimensional character, meaning you don't just want them to have one thing that they do, right? Now, you get the dimension by asking yourself, how does their fear affect their behavior? Because their fear will affect how they behave in different situations, and each situation will be different. So you want to figure out what are their tactics and their tricks and what they do to avoid the fear. So there is a couple of questions that you will ask yourself about the character. How does the character behave when they are alone? How does the character behave when they are with friends? How does the character behave when they are with enemies or people they don't like? How does the character behave when they are with strangers? Just keep in mind here that this is also a place for you to determine what kind of person they are. So you start to delve into their personality. Remember, this is dimension. So you want to go for depth and you want to be able to differentiate your different characters. So also think about what type of person would they have become because of that fear. Try to think about how has that fear, even at such an elemental level as their personality, how has that fear affected them? By figuring out the behavior when they are alone or with friends, enemies, or strangers, you will get a more focused idea of how your character will react within certain situations. Therefore, once you start drafting your story or figuring out your plot, you will already know what is your character's instinctive gut response to something that happens. Because if something happens around friends, you know what their default setting is when they're interacting with friends. You know what their default setting is when they're alone or with enemies or with strangers. So it will help you to craft your story in a cohesive way and to make sure that you have consistency throughout your story and with your character, so that in this instance they act this way, and 3 chapters later in a similar situation you don't have them react in a completely different way. So let's get to it. Alright, so now I know that I did not do a lot of work in this episode, and the reason for that is I need to do all the characters at once, get them all to a certain point of creation, because I want them, in my story at least, they need to work as a team, so they have to have a team dynamic. So not only their external journey or the plot that they follow, but also their character arcs. I want them to play off each other and cause changes and shifts within each other's character arcs. So in order for me to complete this template, I need to have a basic understanding of all my main characters. So once I've done that, I will be able to complete this template. But I wanted to share it with you here because this is the next step that you want to do when you're writing your story. And it's the next step that I'm going to take in my Writing Journey 2.0 project, to figure out my characters and their character arcs. Now, I have basically done one step a week. Last week it was the conflict, the week before it was brainstorming, this week it's characters. Now, I do have, as I said, 5 characters that I need to figure out with their character journeys and their character arcs before I can move on to the plot part that we will discuss next. And I will also be moving this weekend, so my time is a little bit more limited this week. So I do not know if I will be able to get through everything, but irregardless, you will still get an episode next week, whether it is me just giving you a quick update, or maybe I get to finish everything and we can move on to the plot episode. Hopefully, this episode has helped you to see how relatively easy it is to create dynamic and realistic characters. This template just really helps you to focus in all the things that you need to know to get to that realistic and dynamic character. Alright, so until next time, may your creativity flow freely and your fingers dance upon the keys. Keep writing with joy and stay connected. Cheers.